There's a rhythm to economic power that repeats across centuries. A slow rise, an explosive acceleration, and then the moment when momentum itself becomes a burden. Every major nation has felt that pulse in its own way. But no story has unfolded as quickly, as intensely, or as globally as China's. For most of the 20th century, China was a country still waking from a long sleep. But when it finally opened its eyes, it did not rise slowly. It rose like a tidal wave. In a single generation, China transformed itself from a developing nation into the world's manufacturing core. From rural silence to neon skylines that stretch beyond the horizon. Where there were once small towns, where there was once farmland, there are skyscrapers, bullet trains, and industrial arteries connecting 1.4 billion people. The velocity of this transformation stunned the world. It wasn't just growth, it was compression. A century of development squeezed into a few decades. And behind this incredible acceleration stood a powerful, simple formula. Not recklessly, but intentionally. Not as a gamble, but as a strategy rooted in one belief that speed could compensate for time itself. Local governments borrowed to build cities before the people arrived. Developers borrowed to build homes before the buyers existed. Banks lent freely because economic planners believed that infrastructure was the foundation of prosperity, and for years, they were right. China built more bridges, more rail lines, more ports, more airports, and more highways than any nation in history. And each new project created jobs, demand, and growth, which fueled the next wave, and the next, and the next. For a long time, it looked limitless. The more China built, the more China grew. The more China borrowed, the more China produced. The rest of the world watched in awe as factories multiplied and global supply chains quietly came to depend on a single country. China became the workshop of the world, the engine of global manufacturing, the place where metal, labor, logistics, and ambition fused into something unstoppable. But hidden inside every miracle is a cost that only reveals itself later. And for China, that cost came slowly, subtly, through the natural limits that every rising power eventually encounters. Not a crash, not a collapse, but a realization. The old model was reaching its maximum speed. It began in the housing market, the heart of China's economic rise. For years, homes sold faster than they could be built. Entire cities rose from concrete and cranes. But a time came when demand softened. The population aged faster than anyone anticipated. The number of young buyers shrank. Urbanization, once a flood, slowed to a stream. Developers who once expanded endlessly suddenly carried heavy obligations with fewer buyers to support them. Local governments, which had long relied on land sales to fund their budgets, faced tighter margins. Projects slowed. Some paused altogether. Not because the system broke, but because the system grew faster than its next phase could support. And then came the demographic challenge. A force no economic policy can completely outrun. China's population began aging rapidly, and the workforce began shrinking. Fewer workers supporting more retirees, more elderly needing care, fewer children entering schools. The implications ripple across everything: productivity, consumption. It's not a crisis, but it is a long-term gravity that pulls on national momentum. Debt, too, became a weight that required careful balance, not foreign debt, like many developing countries struggle with. China owes much of what it owes to itself to its own banks, its own institutions, and its own financial architecture. That gives China enormous control over how pressure spreads. It allows for restructuring, adjustments, and time. But even internal debt creates friction when the economy slows. Even internal debt can crowd out future spending if not managed carefully. So today, China stands at one of the great turning points in its story. The era of building its way into prosperity, of using construction as the backbone of economic growth, has naturally reached its limit. The next chapter cannot come from more skyscrapers or more highways. It must come from something else entirely, and China knows this. That's why the country is pouring itself into innovation, electric vehicles, robotics, AI, quantum research, renewable energy, advanced manufacturing, and global logistics. China is attempting something incredibly rare: the transition from an investment-driven economy to an innovation-driven one, from physical infrastructure to technological infrastructure, from cheap labor to high-value exports, from being the world's factory to being one of the world's primary innovation hubs. But transitions are not clean stories. They are messy, uneven, and unpredictable. The old system is still enormous, too enormous to disappear quickly. The new system, powerful as it is, needs time to grow large enough to replace it. And that in-between moment creates a tension that outsiders often mistake for crisis. It's not a crisis, it's evolution. Every major power experiences this shift. The United States did in the early 20th century. Japan did in the 1980s. South Korea, Germany, Europe, all went through the same period where the old growth engine slowed before the new one fully emerged. China's journey is simply happening on a larger scale, under a brighter global spotlight, and at a speed that amplifies every challenge. And yet, China's strengths remain immense. A highly organized industrial base, the world's largest manufacturing workforce, massive foreign currency reserves, deep integration into global trade networks, a rising technological ecosystem, a government that can coordinate long-term planning without the political paralysis many Western nations face. These are advantages that don't disappear because of economic pressure. They simply shape how the next chapter unfolds. So what is China facing now? Not decline, not collapse, but complexity. The complexity of a nation transitioning from one era of development to another. The complexity of growth shifting gears. The complexity of redefining what success looks like after decades of explosive expansion. This is the story future historians will write about. The moment China moved from speed to strategy, from expansion to reinvention, from building physical cities to building the architecture of a modern high-tech superpower. And if you look at history closely enough, you'll see the pattern. Great nations don't fall because they slow down. They fall because they fail to adapt. China's next decade will not be defined by how fast it grows, but by how successfully it navigates the transformation already underway. If this gave you a deeper way to understand China's economic journey, subscribe, because we are living through a turning point in global history, and the next chapter is being written right now.